Welcome to our March exclusive. So, our exclusives happen at the end of each month on the last Thursday of the month. And today we will be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, as well as the folks that are joining us for this week's exclusive. That is accessibility. I am joined here today by Eugene Woo with Venngage. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I am the CEO of Venngage, and Venngage is a design and document authoring tool, very similar to Canva or Adobe Express, but we have a focus on accessibility. So I think we'll show a little bit people are interested in what the accessibility features are. I think most importantly, it allows you to address accessibility issues while you're creating your document or design and export it in an accessible PDF format. Thank you
Thanks.
for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. I think when people think about PDFs, they think about Adobe. So I think it's really going to be an interesting discussion today to talk about other options because I don't think a lot of people know you have options to make PDFs. So this will be a really
Yes.
great discussion. Okay. And then Nicole has been with us before. Nicole, give us just a quick intro for those who have not been introduced to you on some of our previous events.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole L'Etoile. I'm a digital accessibility consultant. I run a small company of one, sometimes others, depending on a project for L'Etoile Education. And I help folks make their learning content accessible. And that's what I do. So thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thanks. And has a great community. Lots of folks that have really benefited from learning from you and each other in the communities that you've built and put together. So I really appreciate you joining us. And I had asked Nicole to join us because Nicole actually wrote a blog post for our Design for All Learners blog, which happens to be a book, a collection of stories, accessibility stories, and action you can take. And it's launched about a year ago. That was the editor on that book and one of the authors. But we have an ongoing community, a Design for All Learners community. And Nicole had submitted a blog post for that community where, Nicole, you walked through the steps of making a PDF accessible. And she said, this is Venngage, and I like using Venngage, and this is why. And I thought it would be a really interesting discussion to talk about that on the exclusive, because one of the things we do in XCL is we have a commitment to making sure that accessibility stays no matter what it is you're distributing. So if you are launching PDFs, let's say it's a job aid, we want to make sure that if you spend a lot of time making it accessible, that you're not putting it into a learning management system that is not accessible, because it doesn't matter how accessible the content is if the people that are trying to get to it can't access it because of whatever system it lives in. And so I wanted to have this discussion today to talk about what does end-to-end accessibility actually mean? What does it mean to make sure that something is really accessible? I think that we talk a lot about accessibility as though it is only regarding people who have disabilities. And that is a big part of it for sure, because folks who have different disabilities that might use assistive technologies, use keyboard only navigation, use a screen magnifier, those are things that are important accessibility considerations. But accessibility, it's access. Can you access this thing? And there's a lot more to it, and making sure that the things that we build are accessible, no matter what device you're accessing it from, no matter what your environment is. Are these things set up to truly be accessible? Because if we want to help teach people, we're in learning and development, you can't teach somebody if they can't get to it. They can't access it. What I thought I might do today is kick us off with just a little discussion about Venngage. And Eugene, I'm going to kick it over to you to talk to us a little bit about how did Venngage get started in the accessibility space? What are your thoughts on this? And how does this show up in your authoring environment?
Sure. So Venngage has been around for more than a decade. And when we initially wrote the tool, it was not accessible in the sense that using it as a user was not accessible. And the outputs were also not accessible, like many other tools out there. We made the transition, it's probably 4 years now. I'm trying to figure it out. Probably about four or 5 years ago. It was during the start of the pandemic. So maybe 5 years now. Yeah. And essentially we were doing a rebuild. Software ages very quickly and you need to rebuild it after a few years. That's just the way it is. And when we were doing this rebuild, we looked at what were some of the big gaps that we were seeing out there from both our users and also on the industry. And what we noticed was we had a lot of users who were asking us about accessibility. We saw that no one else, as in none of our competitors, were addressing them, including the really big ones like Canva and Adobe. And when Adobe, I mean like Adobe has many tools, but the tool that is in our category, which will be Adobe Express. And the ones that did it were really difficult. And this is something I talk a lot about. It's really difficult to make, even in Adobe, a PDF accessible. So you need to be, it's highly technical. The barrier to learning it is quite high. In fact, you almost need to be a professional PDF remediator, which is actually a title. It's a job title that there's a certification for it. It's not something that you can just, maybe there's a bunch of trainers. It's not something you can just train your everyday person to do very easily, I would say. And so that was a big need that we decided to commit to. And we build our tool with accessibility as one of the fundamental requirements. Fast forward 5 years later, I think we're still the only design tool that has a commitment to accessibility and that has a full built-in accessibility checker and the ability to export PDFs in an accessible format. And we're probably the only tool that is also addressing the whole making accessibility more accessible, like making it easier for everybody to check their documents or their designs and to export it easily without having to go through a 3-month course on learning PDF remediation, for example.
That's super helpful. And thanks for sharing. And I really want to ask a question that I ask every tool vendor that I talk to. And that is this accessible for people to use with disabilities? Can people who maybe use a screen reader or a braille display or something, like, can I actually go in and build a PDF in Venngage, not just build accessible output?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So for the most part, you can build a PDF or a document or a design with keyboard. It is difficult because it is a drag and drop interface. Although now we have AI features, which actually is a lot easier because you can ask the AI chat to rearrange things for you. So I'd say with the new introduction of the AI chat, which is a very new feature, we've actually made it a lot more accessible. Yeah. Assuming that users use the AI chat, because now you're not moving things pixel by pixel on the screen, which is technically is possible, but very difficult to do from an accessibility point of view.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think that is a good example of why it's so important for folks who are building now, because we're talking to a lot of designers and developers. And it's important for you to think about accessibility at the beginning because Eugene said they retrofitted Venngage about 4 or so years ago. And when you have to go back and do that, when you have people already using the tool, it's very challenging to then go in and make it accessible. And I think that most folks that build tools and build platforms don't think about accessibility at the beginning. They build it in later. And that can be really complicated to do after the fact, right? And still maintain the ability to develop in the tool currently for all your current customers and have backward compatibility and all of those things, which is a lot. And I think that it's really interesting as a message for folks that are joining us today to think about this at the beginning. Because if you go and you build something and then you have to go back and make it accessible after the fact, it is going to be a lot of work and it will never be quite right. It always is going to take a little bit of extra, a little bit of extra manipulation.
So 100% agree on that on creating a tool itself. And that's the reason why a lot of authoring tools, they cannot, adding on that accessibility feature is not very easy. And that's why they haven't done it like that. Why hasn't Canva or Adobe, a lot of these tools, why haven't they done it? Because it's not easy, right? You've got too much baggage already built in because you can't just slap on accessibility at the end. And for documents, it's the same thing. For PDFs, it's the same thing. I think the status quo is created in whatever PowerPoint, Word, whatever tool you can get your hands onto, and then export it to PDF and then give it to a remediator to deal with it. And that's the status quo right now, that you only think about accessibility as a checkbox, like at the end, if your organization is concerned about it. But while you're creating it, you're not thinking about it at all. And very often That creates a huge problem because now you've got this PDF of unknown origin and you have to now go remediate it. And I think for a lot of accessibility teams, that is a big problem. And that's the problem we're trying to solve is to move accessibility upfront to the design stage, to the creation stage, and allow creators themselves to do their own accessibility as opposed to just punting it off to someone else to do.
So I have, as you're talking, I'm working on a project that just started this week, that 6 weeks to meet the April 24th deadline, 2,500 PowerPoint slides. I'm working my way through a 352 deck right now, doing all of the accessibility fixes. And then I'm passing it off to someone that I hired as a subcontractor to work on the project with me, who's an ADS, accessibility document specialist, which you mentioned, a certification, so that they can then run it through the Adobe, do the checks and remediate on their end. So now we have had the PowerPoints remediated and reviewed and pass, then the PDF remediated, reviewed, and passed. And this project is tremendous in a short amount of time. So to be able to build it from the start with accessibility in mind, what I'm doing on my own right now, like when I build my own content, as I build in Venngage, I do my checks as well, but then I have to do my screen reader testing as well, does help with that so that we're not looking at a project of 2,500 slides that have to be remediated.
That is such a
Yikes.
good example. Nicole, can you tell us, you mentioned the April deadline for all the folks joining. Tell them what that is, because not everybody knows what you're talking about.
Sure. The American Disability Act, the new Title II ruling, which was established in April 24, 2025. Oh, sorry, 2026 is the first deadline. We're approaching it. And then we have a deadline of April 2027. And the one coming up now is for communities that support under 50,000. Wait, am I going to get this wrong? Hold on. Above 50,000. And then we're going to under 50,000. And that's your communities that you support. And what we're doing is getting all that content and materials accessible to meet the guideline that was set. And that guideline is the WCAG 2.1 AA criteria. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the standard that was selected was the 2.1 AA. So we're remediating and working on getting everything up to par.
And one of the interesting things about that ruling is that previously the ADA really covered physical spaces. It didn't really cover, it's called ICT, right? Information Communications Technology. It didn't cover web stuff, not very well. It was more, there was a procurement law, which a lot of people are familiar with, 508, but it wasn't an ADA rule that said you have to have these things be accessible. And so now e-learning is covered, digital materials is covered. All of those things are now going to be covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So I think I didn't want to gloss over it. And I think a lot of folks that are responsible for this right now, like folks that are in K through 12, higher ed, government agencies, and like all of those folks are very aware and are trying to get everything compliant. But I think that some folks may not be aware of that. Okay. We talk about how important accessibility is. Eugene, can you tell us a little bit at a high level, what are some of the functions in Venngage that makes it different about how it handles accessibility?
Sure. So I'm going to share my screen because I think its picture is sometimes worth 1,000 words, sometimes. So this is Venngage. This is the templates section of Venngage. So there's very different sections, but very similar to kind of like a Canva, if you've used that tool, or other tools like Adobe Express or even PowerPoint. So there's lots of templates. So it functions just like any other tool. And I'm going to pick this proposal just because it looks like a document. It is a document. And these days you can actually just use AI to edit it. So this is the editor. And this is where, while you're creating something, I would say the key differentiator would be that Venngage has some built-in guardrails around accessibility, and it has an accessibility checker. So at a very high level. And I'll just give you one example of what do I mean by that. So for example, everything is tagged. So by default, everything is tagged properly. One of the criteria is to have proper heading and proper tag. And so if you were just to drag in an H1 or an H2, as you would in many other tools, it will be tagged appropriately. If I drag an H2 in here, it will be tagged appropriately. It doesn't mess up the tagging. And I think the other very important thing would be simple things like just choosing a color, or for example, here you can see it's low contrast. I picked this because I knew it probably was problematic. The user interface itself doesn't really care whether you care about accessibility or not, it'll just tell you, yeah, it's low contrast. So you can pick a darker color. In this case, I'll pick one of these colors. No, we're trying to make the tool, again, make it more accessible to everyone. And I mean that in a more generic sense. We're trying to make accessibility more accessible. And so if you were somebody who didn't know about accessibility, you could, let me change it back to the previous color. You could go, what does it mean by low contrast? And if you click on it, it gives you the WCAG reason. And if you wanted to learn more, you can click on it. And then there's some education on there. So there's what we call in-demand or just-in-time education. So while you're actually using the tool, you're learning a little bit about accessibility, and we built that into the experience. Yeah, otherwise it looks very similar to any other PowerPoint-ish tool that you use. Everything is drag and drop. You can change the images, you can crop them to replace it. And obviously now we have these AI things too. You could actually generate images. You could obviously add alt text in there. You can, the alt text is already generated, but if it weren't, you could generate the alt text as well. So things like that. So lots of built-in accessibility features that you probably won't find in other tools.
What I like about what you shared, and I just want to bring attention to this, is you mentioned that whether you care about accessibility or not, or whether you've been paying attention to it or not, this tool makes it part of the workflow and it brings your attention to it. Some people may not be aware of what alt text even is. I know that because I teach it all the time. But these are some of the things that a lot of people might not, they just don't know. They don't know what they don't know yet. And so making it part of the interface, making it part of the authoring environment and in the flow of doing that work, rather than some tools where, let's say, for example, you add an image and then you have to go in and then you have to edit the image and then you have to go to an alt text thing and then there's no generator that can get you started. So then you're going to have to do that in a different tool. And so some of those features make it easier for designers and developers to build these things more quickly, but also have that easier access to making accessibility part of that workflow. There have been so many tools that they kind of tack on some accessibility. Like if you want to make it accessible, or if your company cares about that, or if that's something that you have to do, I hate messaging like that because one, you're not done with your project. If you're not doing these things, then you have an incomplete PDF. You have an incomplete piece of content because you haven't added your alt text, right? You haven't checked your contrast. It's not done yet. And so if you're skipping those things, it has nothing to do with whether your company cares about it or not. It has to do with how good of a designer are you and can you make sure that these things are done? And I think as an authoring tool environment, making sure that this is easy to do in that flow of work, it helps everyone. And it also has a bit of shared responsibility for all of us, right? The onus cannot just be on one part. It has to be that everyone has a role to play in making things more accessible. So I really like that you brought that point out. So, Nicole, tell us, what are some of the tricks, because you use Venngage, what are some of the tricks or some of the things that you've come across that you would share for someone who maybe wanted to get started with making accessible PDFs?
Yeah, it's okay. I'll also do a quick screen share too, and I'll pull up a slide deck that I have and just walk us through the way that I work through this and also just give some context. One of the easy things about this is I made the switch from a tool such as Canva to Venngage not too long ago. And wait, did I say Canva right? Yes, Canva, not Canvas. Okay, sometimes the LMS and then the tool. I'm like, which one am I talking about? And I made the switch, and I really appreciated that Eugene, your team reached out to me and be very transparent about that and said, hey, would you be willing to give it a try? And I did. And what I really appreciated, and I have up a slide deck right now, and I have the accessibility panel drop down. And if you were able to look over here for a second, I'll talk these out a second. There's check accessibility, edit tag order, set document language, visual simulator, and then show alt text on canvas. What I really like is that there's a visual simulator built in. So I can do my color alone checks once I'm working on the slides to make sure that I have met the target of, am I not using color alone, built into my slide decks right away. I love that I will edit the tag order very easily inside this PDF, easily. So what I'm noticing now in my project of 2,500 PowerPoint slide decks, if I don't have a title on a slide, it's not as easy as highlighting text and assigning it a heading in PowerPoint right now, which is going to become a PDF. But if I do that in my Venngage presentations, and I'm using this a lot for my PowerPoints because eventually they do become PDFs. If I go to, let me just jump down to slide 2 here. I'll go up to File and I'll run the accessibility panel and I'll edit tag order or look at the tags. I can look right at this page, go to page 2 and highlight it, check my design. I want to look at headings specifically. Now, this whole column has a lot to look at. I can look at color contrast, text size, tables. I can do alternative text, reading order, headings, use of color, text effects, gradients, images of text. Love that new feature, document title. So I kind of have this built-in way to make sure that I'm paying attention to the important components of an accessible PDF. And so for logical reading order, let's just say I want to go and set the reading order or look at the reading order. I can make sure that the reading order is correct, but I can also check my tags here. Let me just go to text here. Make sure that's an H2. I'll go back to my checker. Sorry, I wanted to go to my headings. There we go. Thank you. And for example, let's say I was on this slide, which is the second slide. I want to make sure that my title's in H2 because I already had my H1 at my first slide. But what if I didn't have a title and I was quickly fixing this? I can easily change it to H3. I can change it to H4 without having to do a ton of reworking a particular page or slide. So these are the things that I'm looking for, is the ease of use and all the components that are going to make an accessible PDF in the process of the design. So when I do download the PDF, hopefully I have very few things that have to be fixed, if anything at all.
That's really helpful. And I think, Nicole, one of the things that we're going to do after this session is point to some instructions that you could use to go through what process Nicole used with screenshots and things to follow along the process and how she goes through to make sure that her PDF is accessible as she builds it. I think the thing that both of you just demoed really well is how important it is to be paying attention to this stuff as you build it. Don't build the whole thing and do it later. As you're building this out, be tagging your headings, be checking your contrasts. That way you're making consistent choices throughout. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, just as a general discussion, is this concept of making sure that after you've set all this PDF stuff up and you've made your accessible PDF, then what? Am I testing it somewhere? Am I going to check it with a screen reader? I'm seeding this question. What do you do next, Nicole? How do I make sure that it is accessible?
I'll use VoiceOver on my Mac, and I'll find that in PDF format, that's the first view I'm looking for, is if I send this as an attachment. A lot of these I'm uploading these into a course that I've created, sharing them with the audience. So most likely it's in that PDF straight clean format, and I'll test it with VoiceOver. And then as long as I get everything that I want to get and it makes sense, then I feel like, okay, this is good. I check it off. I'll send it out. If not, I need to go back and remediate something. But for the most part, that's the way I would run it. And then if there's particular issues or anything that I'm noticing or something that's tricky, I will share it with a friend of mine who may or may not be on this call right now to do an NVDA check for us to make sure that it's working on multiple assistive technologies. Hey, Jacob. Most of all, multiple screen readers, multiple different ways. And sometimes we may or may not run into issues depending on the situation.
And I think this is a really good point because just for folks who may not be familiar with these technologies, VoiceOver is a screen reader that's built in to your device if you're a Mac user. So it's on your iPhone, if it's on your MacBook. If you're a Mac person, then you've already got VoiceOver built in. There are other screen readers that are built into systems, like Windows has Narrator, but one of the things that I would recommend if you're a Windows user is to download NVDA. NVDA is another screen reader which is free. So free for you to download and use and test with. There's also ones that have been around for a very long time, like JAWS, which was the first screen reader that I ever encountered in my career. It's really helpful to get a screen reader, your favorite screen reader, and learn the different key combinations to use it. There are some little tip sheets that we have on our accessibility primer. If you go to buildcapable.com/accessibility, there is a free primer that you can download that has access to different screen reader, quick reference guides, and things like that for you to check out. But it's really helpful to get familiar with at least some basic testing using a screen reader. But keep in mind, every screen reader is different. So VoiceOver works really well on a Mac, but it might not necessarily work well with every player because it is a Mac tool. So if you use it in something like Chrome's player for PDFs, it might show up a little bit different than NVDA does. So there are differences between different players that you're able to go through and access a PDF, like a web browser or a desktop or Acrobat or whatever you open your PDF in. The other thing to consider is what preferences someone has set up on their screen reader. So by default, NVDA will read off things like tick parentheses and periods and things like that. And so in your settings, you do have to make some adjustments to make sure that screen reader is reading things in the way that you want or that you would expect. So there are preferences, and then there are the ways that different tools work. And then there are different players. So one of the things that I encourage you to do is when you're building accessible PDFs specifically, and really any accessible content, you need to test it in the tools that people will be accessing it in, not just on its own. So you can, let's say, for example, you were building a PDF in Venngage and you tested and everything's working great in Safari with VoiceOver. That's fine. But if you're going to
PDF.
use it in
Google
XCL,
Chrome
for
with
example,
privacy,
which we're going to talk
Venngage
about in a
address
second,
and bookmark.
you need to test it
Click
in
increase
XCL
font
and
size
make
graph
sure that it's
blank.
working as expected in XCL.
Venngage
If
PDF
you know that
heading
your
level
folks
1.
in your audience
Please
are
complete the
using
form to
multiple
begin.
screen readers,
Blank.
then you need to
First name,
try
edit
to test
selected
it in
Rob.
different environments
Last name, edit
and
selected
make sure that you
Christy.
have a cadence for how you're
Email
setting these
address
things up, and you can learn
required.
the different
Edit
quirks and
required.
different
Selected
players
Rob
and
build capable
different
com.
screen readers.
Remember
But
me
there is a
checkbox
base
checked.
level of accessibility
Continue button.
that makes things way more accessible to
XCL
folks. And even
content
if it
link.
can be like a little
Frame
quirky at
menu button
times,
collapsed.
the good
Submenu
news is that
toggle
screen reader
sidebar.
users are very
Button
innovative
collapsed. Find.
and they are very
Button
good
unavailable
at working
previous.
around
Button
inaccessible
unavailable
content.
next.
So any of the
Page
things
spin
that
button
you do
invalid
make
entry
it
editable
so
0.
much better
Button
than doing
unavailable
nothing.
zoom out.
And so I encourage you to
Zoom in
get
button.
started, to start
Zoom
testing
combo
things, to
highlight
try
radio
different
but
things.
text draw rate
Making
add or
progress
print
is
button.
better than
Tools
being
menu button
perfect.
collapsed.
But the
Page
more you
1
test
region
it and the more you
designed with
learn and get
accessibility
feedback
in
from
mind.
your
Heading level
users,
1
the better
clickable
that
out
you'll
of
be able to
region.
make
Page
these.
2 region
I
what to
wanted
expect in this
to
session.
share just a
Heading
little
level 2
bit
designed with
about XCL
accessibility
and
in
what
mind.
tracking looks like for PDFs
Explore
in
the web
XCL.
content
So
accessibility
you've created this
guidelines.
beautiful PDF. It's
WCAG.
accessible.
Clickable
And
2 out
now,
of
how
region.
am I going to
Page 3
distribute
region.
and
Why
track
does
this?
accessibility
If
matter?
you are going to distribute
Heading
this
level
with
2
XCL,
accessibility
we're
isn't
going to
just all
keep it
text.
accessible for
Adding
you.
captions
So this
and
system
designing
is
only
what's
for
called a
those with
headless system,
disabilities.
and it allows you
It's about
to
ensuring our
distribute
content works for
your
everyone,
content using
regardless of
either
their
a link
abilities.
or a QR code.
Think
So
about a
I'll share
time
my
when you faced
screen,
a
and
barrier,
if you
big
would
or
like,
small,
you
that
can
made
actually
something
play
difficult
along
to
in this
access.
part. So I will
How did it
drop
feel?
the link
Clickable 3 out of
here
region. Page 4
into
region out of region.
the
Page 5 region out of region.
workspace. Let me
Page 6
do
region out of
that.
region. Page
And
7
then
region
if
out
you
of
are
region.
following
Page 8
along
region out
on
of region.
LinkedIn
Page
in the
9
live
region out of
stream,
region. Page 1
let me see
0
if I
region
can
out of region. Page
cross-post
1
this.
1
We'll see
region
how
out of
fancy I
region.
can be
Page
today.
1
I'm
2
not making
region
any
out of region.
promises.
Page 1 3
But this
region
is an
out of region.
opportunity
Page
for
1
you
4
to
region
try
out
it.
of
If
region.
you're on
Page 1
Zoom,
5
there's
region out of
also a
region.
QR
Page 1
code.
6
If
region.
you're on the live stream, you can scan this QR code with your phone. And what I'd like for you to do is, if you'd
Desk
like to participate, you can scan this QR code or use the link in the chat. And there's an option for you to put in your name, because for this particular white paper, which is a PDF, for this particular white paper, I actually set it up with the ability to enter in your name, but it's optional. So if you want to see your name in the data in a second, then you can pop your name in. Otherwise, you can just continue. It'll enter your information anonymously. All of that landing page that you'll find when you launch the link, that's all customizable in the brand profiles in XCL. So I'm going to head over to the analytics section of XCL. And if you are playing along, you will be able to find your progress here. All of the data gets reported in real time in XCL. So as someone is accessing this wonderful PDF that you've created, you'll be able to track who, assuming that you've captured that information and you're not doing it anonymously, which is a decision that you get to make. But you'll be able to know who, you'll be able to know what they viewed. So you'll be able to see the name of that document in this case, and then you'll be able to, for PDFs, see what pages they went to, which is really cool. The other thing that you'll get to see is how long they were in it. Rob, you're only in there for 16 seconds. So you'll be able to see how long they actually spent in that document. And we use this for job aids. We use this for white papers. We use this for even infographics and things like that. There are all sorts of uses for this, just to see, is anybody actually reading that really great job aid that you put together? Is anybody reading through that new guide that you just put out for this new process? So you'll be able to see how many pages they actually went through. You actually can also see if they downloaded it, if they printed it, all of those things are tracked. So it's really interesting the amount of data you can get just from a PDF. There are lots of other cool things I'd love to show you, but I will post some things in the chat after this is over so that you can go and explore some of the other cool videos and tutorials we have about the types of data that you can capture. So that's how XCL works. It's super simple, as you just experienced if you played along with us. But what I wanted to end with today was just a little bit of a conversation about what does this look like in practice? So any final thoughts from Eugene and then Nicole? What are some of the things that you would encourage folks to do who are on the call today as they move forward as it relates to accessibility and PDFs, like thinking about inclusion and making things more accessible?
I'll just piggyback a little bit about what you said around the testing environment, and just I'd encourage you today, if you're listening, or tomorrow whenever you hear the recording, to find one of your PDFs that you've recently created or used and run the screen reader, run a test to experience that. And then from there, it might be an opening for you to say, okay, this doesn't read right, this doesn't sound right, or I didn't have any headings in my document, just to start paying attention to what may be missing. And then also give yourself a pat on the back for what you did well as well. Yeah.
One thing that I'll say, Nicole, to that point, we actually have a recording, a screen recording of Nicole's PDF that she was demoing a moment ago in XCL. And what I'll do is I will post that with this recording on our YouTube channel. I'll post it at the end. So that way, if you've never had a chance to experience what it's like to listen to a screen reader, we do have a screen recording that was done in NVDA of Nicole's PDF that was built in Venngage and tested in XCL. And we'll post that as part of the video recording afterwards. Thanks to Rob Christie for that recording, because I'm a Mac user. I do not use NVDA, but I had my lovely CTO, Rob Christie, record that for us. Eugene, any final words from you?
I would just end with the software layer, that the one thing that most people don't think about in accessibility is the software that they use it. And I think you've given the two examples here in today's call is you can have something very accessible, but if you put it in an LMS or a CMS that's not accessible, guess what? It's not accessible. Or if you start with an authoring tool that's very difficult, like an Adobe or maybe even a PowerPoint or a Canva, it's going to be an uphill battle. And I think there's an overemphasis on training, but they should be more focused on just the software, right? Like you can solve a lot of these problems by using software that will allow you to create things that are accessible. So that's my final. Of course, I'm biased and sell software, but I think it's one of the things that people always underestimate and don't think a lot about. And they continue to use their old software that just doesn't work and will always require remediation, when really they should be thinking about the software layer or the infrastructure as one layer, and then the training and everything else, and the testing and all of that as well.
I love this comment, and I'm going to say something that's not work appropriate because I run this company. But I think that if you all have not heard of this, there is a term called enshittification, which is a real term. And there's a book that just came out. I can't remember I should remember his name, but the person who coined this term talks about how software has intentionally become more difficult to use so that people can charge for training, so that people can charge more money for it, because there's this perception that the harder something is to use, the more valuable it is for some reason, which is wild to me. But I really appreciate anyone that is working in the technology space that is building tools that make it easier to use. If you spend time thinking about accessibility and thinking about usability up front, you can design these workflows to be so much easier for people. There's a whole field called user experience. My UX designer, I have to give a shout out to Bryn Kennedy, who is our UX designer, who is instrumental to the design of XCL. It is really important to practice with these tools and choose the tool that's easiest for you in your workflow and helps you accomplish your goals. If it's hard to use, I promise you, a lot of it is not because it's you. A lot of it is because these tools are not built very well. And so I really appreciate when vendors have a commitment to making these tools easier for use, because that's what makes a good tool, right? I wanted to close us out today by letting you know that next month in our exclusive, we're going to be talking about some nerdy topics, and we're going to announce those in the coming week on our LinkedIn page. But next month, I will not be here because I'll be at Learning Technologies in London presenting on XCL for our award, our gold award that we won. We won Most Innovative Learning Technology of 2025. And so that was huge. In less than a year, we won that award. And I'm very proud of it, very proud of our team. But Rob is going to take over. Rob and Sean Putman will be here next month, and they're going to be talking about some nerdy data connector stuff. So we'll talk more about that on the page and give you some more details about it. And so stick around next month if you want to learn about some nerdy data stuff. Otherwise, if you could be at Learning Technologies, definitely let me know, and I'd love to meet up with you there. I have a session on XCL and on accessibility with Susie, and so we're going to be doing some really cool stuff next month. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
This is a brief example of a Venngage PDF hosted in XCL, read using an NVDA screen reader.
Venngage PDF heading level 1. Please complete the form to begin. Blank. First name edit selected Rob. Last name edit selected Christy. Email address required. Edit required selected Rob. Build capable com. Remember me checkbox checked. Continue button. XCL content link. Frame menu button collapsed submenu toggle sidebar. Button collapsed find. Button unavailable previous. Button unavailable next. Page spin button invalid entry editable 0. Button unavailable zoom out. Zoom in button. Zoom combo highlight radio text draw radio add or print button. Tools menu button collapsed. Page 1 region design with accessibility in mind heading level 1 page 2 region what to expect in this session heading level 2 design with accessibility in mind. Explore the web content accessibility guidelines. WCAG. Page 3 region why does accessibility matter? Heading level 2 accessibility isn't just all text, adding captions, and designing only for those with disabilities. It's about ensuring our content works for everyone, regardless of their abilities. Think about a time when you faced a barrier big or small that made something difficult to access. How did it feel?